A girl is standing in front of a glass window, admiring her reflection with a playful smile. On the other side of the glass, a boy watches her quietly, finding her cute and deciding to tease her a little. He gently taps the glass. The girl looks up, surprised and a little shy, which makes the boy smile even more. He taps again, but suddenly, everything starts shaking. The glass vibrates, the table items move, and the lights swing wildly as if an earthquake has struck. Panic fills the air. In the next instant, the glass shatters and their eyes meet, just for a moment before the entire building collapses into rubble. In mere seconds, a busy mall turns into ruins. 48 lives are lost. The girl, badly injured, is rushed to the hospital. When she wakes up, her mother rushes in. But instead of relief, her first words are, "Where's your sister?" An hour earlier, the mother had asked her older daughter, Wang Xiu, to take her little sister to the mall for a photo shoot. Bored while waiting for her sister to finish makeup, Wang Xiu decided to try on a new lipstick when she faintly heard her sister calling. But she couldn't hear clearly. And then the ground began to shake. The building trembled violently, collapsing before her eyes. Her sister disappeared beneath the debris. When Wang Xiu regained consciousness, she was lying in a hospital bed. Her mother's trembling voice asked again, "Where's your sister?" Wang Xiu could only cry and say she didn't know. When the news confirmed that her sister had died, her mother broke down completely, blaming Wang Xiu for not staying with her. Wang Xiu, though alive, was filled with pain and guilt. Her parents fought constantly, accusing each other, while she stood helpless, knowing nothing could bring her sister back. 10 years passed. Wang Xiu grew up, but happiness never returned. She was haunted by the same nightmare over and over, losing her sister, hearing the screams, feeling the tremors again. Her parents, broken by grief, had turned bitter. Her mother drank every day, and her father had fallen into deep depression. Wang Xiu was forced to become the mature one, silently carrying everyone's pain, forgetting her own. Meanwhile, the boy from the glass, his life had changed forever too. That day was supposed to be his birthday celebration with his father, but his father was called back to work and told him to wait at the ice cream shop. What came instead was tragedy. When the boy woke up, his right leg had been pierced by steel rods, trapped beneath the wreckage. His father didn't survive. The accident left him with both emotional and physical scars. Whenever it rained, the pain in his leg returned, sharp and unbearable, only dulled by medicine, with no family, no education, and no support. He survived by doing small construction jobs, living day to day. One afternoon, at a construction site, the contractor not only refused to pay the workers, but also acted arrogantly. The boy, Kondo, finally spoke up, only to get slapped hard. That night, the contractor and his men cornered him in a dark alley. But fate had its own plan. Passing by was Wang Xiu, who saw the scene unfold. She quietly stepped into the alley and froze. Standing before her was a bruised, exhausted man whose face somehow felt familiar. And so begins a story of two souls, both scarred by the same tragedy, unknowingly linked by pain, now standing once again before each other, like two reflections from opposite sides of the same glass. Kangdu, who had fainted from his injuries, was gently carried home by Wang Xiu to her father's house. There, she carefully cleaned and bandaged his wounds with quiet patience. The next morning, when Kangdu woke up, he found himself in an unfamiliar home. Wang Xiu's father, a silent and reserved man, didn't ask much. He simply told Kangdu to go to the hospital for a checkup. When Kangdu returned to his own small place, his mind kept replaying the blurry memory of the person who had rescued him the night before. Though he hadn't clearly seen the face, that warm presence lingered in his thoughts. That same day, he learned that the old collapsed mall, the site of the tragic accident years ago, was being rebuilt. The developers had even erected a memorial stone for the victims. To Kangdu, it felt like reopening an old wound that had never healed. Overcome with rage and pain, he picked up a hammer and smashed the monument. For Kangdu, that accident had changed everything. He had lost his father in the collapse and barely survived himself. The pain had never truly faded. His body still carried scars, and his soul, even deeper ones. Surprisingly, the new project's supervisor didn't report him for destroying the memorial. Instead, he gave Kangdu a strange condition. He could make amends by working as a site supervisor for the new mall construction on the same land. Kangdu was confused and suspicious of the man's intentions. Later, he learned that the supervisor, Zhou Yuan, was also a victim of that same tragedy. Zhou's father had been the chief architect of the original mall, and when the building collapsed, the world had cruelly pinned all the blame on him. People always found it easier to condemn the vulnerable. The weak became the scapegoats. The shame and guilt had crushed Zhou's father until he took his own life. Zhou, believing deeply in his father's innocence, decided to become an architect himself and design the new mall as a way to redeem his family's name. Kangdu, understanding Zhou's pain as a fellow survivor, agreed to help him oversee the reconstruction. Meanwhile, Wang Xiu, another victim of that same collapse, had lost her younger sister in the disaster. Carrying years of guilt and a fierce obsession with safety, she became an architectural model designer, determined to ensure no such tragedy ever happened again. One day, Wang Xiu arrived at the construction site for inspection, but a sudden gust of wind blew her design papers away. As she rushed to catch them, she slipped and fell into a deep water pit. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't reach the edge. Panic rose as the cold water surrounded her. She screamed for help, but her voice vanished into the empty site. The terror dragged her back to that horrible day 10 years ago, trapped under rubble, gasping for air, praying to survive. Her voice cracked as she cried for help again, trembling and helpless, but no one came. Shivering, she curled up in a corner of the pit, her body freezing. Just then, a reflection appeared in the water, a silhouette above her. It was Kangdu. To Wang Xiu, it felt like seeing a lifeline. Without hesitation, Kangdu threw aside his hat and reached out. After a desperate struggle, he managed to pull her out, both drenched and exhausted. But the sky soon turned dark, and heavy rain began to pour. Seeing Wang Xiu limping, clutching Clutching her wet papers and equipment, Kangdu quietly took off his jacket and handed it to her. Wangxiu gave him a confused look and said softly, "Are you crazy?" "I'm already soaked." Kangdu simply smiled, took off his hat, placed it gently on her head, and said calmly, "Now we're even." In that quiet moment, and between rain, exhaustion, and unspoken pain, two souls who had once been broken by the same tragedy began to share a fragile, wordless bond. Kangdu had always known deep down that the person who saved him that night in the alley was Wangxiu. When he got home, he quietly opened his cupboard, took out his shirt, smelled it lightly, there was no scent left, and then handed it to Wangxiu before silently leaving the room. Outside, he confronted Sumei, scolding her harshly for not warning Wangxiu about entering the restricted area, his tone filled with frustration and concern. Wangxiu, who had just changed her clothes, accidentally walked in on this scene and saw a side of Kangdo she hadn't before, caring, not cruel. The next day, the two waited for a bus together. Wangxiu assumed Kangdu would ride the same bus as her, but when she got on, she noticed he wasn't there. She turned back to see him still standing at the stop, and it hit her. He had only come to drop her off safely. Watching his figure disappear as the bus pulled away, she felt a pang of regret for not even getting to say thank you. That evening, as Kangdu stood by a small food stall buying fried snacks, he turned and saw Wangxiu running toward him, slightly out of breath. He smiled and offered her one of the snacks. As he prepared to leave, Wangxiu called out his name. Despite the pain in her injured foot, she had followed him all the way here just to say thank you. Watching her stand there, drenched in effort and sincerity, Kangdu couldn't help but feel a deep warmth rise in his chest. He smiled gently and apologized to her, though for what, even he couldn't fully explain. Later that night, their company held a dinner gathering. When the city manager arrived, everyone quickly stood up to greet him. Everyone except Kangdu, who sat calmly, chewing his food without care. His casual attitude drew quiet stares until his boss began lecturing the group about workplace safety and reminded them never to repeat the mistakes of 10 years ago. In the middle of his speech, Wangxiu accidentally burned her hand while grilling meat, cutting the boss off mid-sentence. Embarrassed, she stood up and excused herself to leave early. Kangdu noticed this, quietly got up after her, and went out to buy burn ointment. But when he returned, he saw Wangxiu standing with Zhou Yuan, the site supervisor. For a moment, Kangdu froze, then silently turned away, returning to his seat. He tossed the ointment on the table, downed his beer in one go, and muttered that he was leaving early. As he passed behind the boss, he pretended to stumble and fell onto him, apologizing clumsily, saying he was a bit drunk. Surrounded by employees, the boss could only swallow his anger and laugh it off. The next morning, a coworker handed Wangxiu a small packet, the burn ointment Kangdu had left behind at the party. The coworker mentioned that after Wangxiu had left last night, Kangdu had gone out and bought it for her. Staring at her slightly blistered hand, Wangxiu slowly realized the truth. The medicine really had been for her. Wanting to thank him properly, Wangxiu looked up Kangdu's address through the company's employment records. The location led her to an unexpected place, a dimly lit nightclub. As she walked in hesitantly, a drunk man blocked her path, making her step back nervously, but just as fear crept in, Kangdu appeared out of nowhere like a guardian, pulling her safely into his arms. Later, the two sat together on the quiet roadside, drinking under the faint glow of streetlights. Kangdu looked at her and gently asked if she remembered a song, Bulldog Mansion. He wanted to know if Wangxiu was the same girl from back then. Slowly, the truth came to light. They had met 10 years ago, trapped together under the rubble of the collapsed mall. Amid pain and fear, Kangdu had sung to calm her trembling heart, giving her courage to survive the darkest hours. But when rescuers finally arrived and carried Wangxiu out, another collapse struck. Debris fell again, and Kangdu's head was hit hard, leaving him unconscious and erasing everything that came after. Neither had known until now that their destinies had already crossed once before, buried under the same ruins, connected by the same song. Perhaps out of a natural instinct for self-protection, Wangxiu's mind had completely erased those terrifying memories from 10 years ago. When Kangdu tried recalling that day, he couldn't help but start singing the same old song, the one he had sung back then to comfort her. His voice, filled with raw emotion, echoed through the quiet night. Wangxiu, however, didn't remember anything. She simply looked around awkwardly, covering her face with her hands, embarrassed by Kangdu's sudden burst of emotion. As time passed, their work on the same project gave them more chances to interact. Gradually, familiarity grew into comfort, and comfort turned into a quiet, unspoken bond. One evening, Wangxiu was working late in the office when heavy rain began pouring outside. She suddenly remembered that Kangdu had mentioned taking the night shift at the construction site. Worried, she grabbed her umbrella and rushed out. Meanwhile, at the site, Kangdu was inspecting the area with a flashlight when he noticed something half buried in the mud, a shoe. His heart jumped. He panicked, thinking someone might be trapped beneath, and began digging desperately, hands trembling as old memories came flooding back. The suffocating darkness, the weight of rubble, the helpless cries for help. His mind slipped into chaos. When Wangxiu arrived and saw him digging frantically against the wall, she ran over and tried to stop him. But Kangdu, lost in his trauma, shoved her away unintentionally, muttering that someone was inside, still alive. He kept digging like a man possessed until Wangxiu's alarmed shout snapped him back to reality. Cracks were spreading across the wall and debris was about to fall. Without hesitation, Wangxiu threw herself forward, shielding the weakened wall with her own body to stop it from collapsing. Days later, a lighter, more human side of their story began to unfold. Wangxiu jokingly asked Kangdu to buy her a drink, but he shyly replied that he didn't have money. Annoyed yet amused, she snatched his bottle and drank from it instead. For the ever-single Kangdu, this innocent act left him flustered. To him, it felt like an indirect kiss. The next day, during a field visit, he surprised her by bringing bringing her a drink of her own. Wang Xiu smiled brightly, taking a sip and teasing that it tasted sweeter than usual. Ever since she met Kangdu, Wang Xiu began to care about her appearance, wearing face masks, putting on lipstick, things she hadn't done in years. But her mother noticed and grew upset. Her mother, still haunted by the loss of Wang Xiu's younger sister, couldn't bear to see her elder daughter dressing up again. Wang Xiu's sister had once been a child actress, adored and constantly dolled up by their mother, but beauty had brought tragedy. During a mall event, the building had collapsed and the little girl never came home again. The pain of that loss still lived inside her mother, buried but never healed. When her mother broke down crying, Wang Xiu stood silently, forcing back her own tears. She wanted to comfort her but could barely speak. Just then, Kangdu arrived outside to pick Wang Xiu up from work, and seeing her comforting her crying mother, he quietly turned away, pretending not to notice, giving them space. Later, when Wang Xiu had calmed down, Kangdu gently told her that the family they were supposed to meet that day had canceled. Then, trying to sound casual, he suggested taking her out instead, though in truth, he had deliberately cleared his schedule just to help her relax. That afternoon, they went to an amusement park. Kangdu, with his usual awkward humor, somehow found a cute hair clip and insisted Wang Xiu wear it. She refused, embarrassed, saying it looked childish. Because of their shared trauma, both avoided high rides. The tall structures reminded them of falling debris and collapsing metal, so they chose something simple, the carousel. As it spun slowly under the soft lights, Kangdu looked at Wang Xiu's back and drifted into thought, remembering how, 10 years ago, in the ruins of that collapsed mall, it was her trembling voice and his desperate song that had kept them both alive. While spending time together, Wang Xiu suddenly mentioned she was hungry and wanted to eat octopus. Kangdu immediately took her to a small restaurant that served it. Watching Wen Jiu enjoy her meal so cheerfully brought a rare smile to Kangdu's face. Her happiness seemed to warm him, but truth be told, he didn't really like octopus himself, so he excused himself, saying he needed to use the restroom. When he returned, he was stunned to see Wang Xiu being harassed by a street vendor selling pineapples. Even though she had done nothing wrong, Wang Xiu kept apologizing again and again, trying to avoid conflict. Seeing her being treated unfairly made Kangdu's heart ache. On their way back, he couldn't hold it in and scolded her, asking why she acted like such a saint when people didn't even appreciate it. This time, Wang Xiu snapped. Furious, she shoved Kangdu to the ground, finally letting out all her anger and frustration. Kangdu, seeing her so worked up, deliberately provoked her more, until she vented everything she had been holding inside. That night, the tension between them melted into something softer. They sat by the river drinking. Wang Xiu wasn't good with alcohol, and after just a few drinks, she was already tipsy. Kangdu didn't drink much. Instead, he sat quietly chewing on a carrot. Wang Xiu giggled at the sight, teasing him. Then, out of nowhere, she said something that sounded almost like a confession. Kangdu froze, unsure how to react, while Wang Xiu rested her chin in her hand and stared at him with a dreamy expression. For a man who had never been in love, the intensity of her gaze made him blush, and he nervously bit into the carrot again to hide his shyness. As they walked home, Wang Xiu kept teasing him, pretending to send him to buy more drinks. They ended up by the Han River, where the night air was cool and silent. Wang Xiu, drunk and emotional, gazed deeply at Kangdu, her eyes slowly drifting toward his lips as if searching for warmth. Suddenly, she reached out and pulled his arm, kissing him tenderly. The unexpected kiss left Kangdu frozen in shock. It was his first kiss ever. Wang Xiu leaned gently against his shoulder, and Kangdu couldn't bring himself to wake her. They sat together like that quietly by the river until dawn. The next morning, as he walked Wang Xiu home, Kangdu found himself stealing glances at her lips, lost in the memory of the night before. He couldn't stop thinking, did she really not remember what happened? Did she just take his first kiss and forget it like nothing? Still, despite the teasing thoughts, their bond grew stronger after that night. Not long after, while the worker was climbing a ladder at the construction site, he suddenly felt dizzy and nearly fell. But Kangdu rushed forward and caught him just in time, saving his life but falling into a pit himself in the process. When Wang Xiu arrived at the site later and learned Kangdu had been injured, she panicked and hurried to the hospital. That night, when Kangdu returned home sore and exhausted, Wang Xiu's worried eyes and gentle words made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, warmth like sunlight touching his heart. Soon after, Wang Xiu received a call from her older sister and had to leave. Before going, she told Kangdu, "If I don't come out in 10 minutes, rush in." It turned out her sister had a persistent male fan who wouldn't stop bothering her. During the scuffle, Wang Xiu fell hard and hit her head on the floor. Kangdu, who had been waiting outside, rushed in immediately. Her sister anxiously asked Kangdu a series of questions, his name, his age, what year it was, trying to check Wang Xiu's condition. Kangdu stood there completely confused by her rapid-fire questions, not realizing that Wang Xiu's lost memories weren't a choice. They had been stolen by the trauma of the mall collapse years ago. Once everyone confirmed Wang Xiu was okay, they all went back to Kangdu's house together. As they chatted about sports, Wang Xiu casually mentioned a few things, words that sounded oddly familiar to Kangdu. They were the same phrases he had once said to her when they were trapped under the rubble years ago. She remembered the lines, but not that he had said them. The realization hit Kangdu hard. The trauma he thought he had buried began to resurface, flashing images of that day, the faces of those buried beneath the ruins, especially Akai's lifeless expression. Overwhelmed, Kangdu's breathing grew shallow. Panic gripped his heart. He quietly backed away, hiding in the corner by the stairs, trembling as the weight of old nightmares returned stronger than ever. Wang Xiu gently placed her hand on Kangdu's shoulder, sensing his unease. The memories of that tragic accident still haunted him deeply, and he wanted to know if Wang Xiu too remembered those dark, unbearable moments, if she had suffered the same torment that never left his heart. But when he realized she had completely forgotten those painful memories, a quiet relief washed over him. Without thinking, he suddenly pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if to protect her from the ghosts of their shared past. One day at the hospital, Wangxiu unexpectedly met Kangdu's grandmother. The elderly woman immediately felt a warm connection with her and kindly held her hand, insisting she come home for a visit. She wanted to introduce this gentle, kind-hearted girl to her beloved grandson, who, to everyone's surprise, turned out to be none other than Kangdu himself. Both of them stood frozen in astonishment when they saw each other at the door. As it turned out, fate had already tied their paths together once again. Sometime earlier, Kangdu's grandmother had almost fainted in public due to her poor health. Wangxiu, passing by, had rushed to help her and taken her to the hospital, staying by her side the whole time. Her kindness and quiet warmth had deeply touched the old woman's heart. Though in the rush of things, she forgot to ask for Wangxiu's contact. Now, destiny had brought them face to face again, and without hesitation, the grandmother had brought Wangxiu home. Before she left, she asked Kangdu to escort her back. At the bus stop, as a bus approached, Wangxiu was about to step on when Kangdu gently grabbed her hand. They stood there in silence, hands intertwined, letting the first bus go by. When the next bus arrived, Kangdu tried to help her on, but this time, Wangxiu clutched his hand tightly, refusing to let go. He didn't move either, so they simply stood there, watching bus after bus come and go, fingers locked, feeling each other's warmth as if the whole world had gone still. But the silence eventually broke. Wangxiu, her eyes glistening, confessed in a trembling voice that she wasn't as good a person as he thought. She told Kangdu the truth she had buried for years, that during the collapse, it was she who had left her little sister behind, and that another boy had died because of her. "I lived," she cried, her voice cracking, but they didn't. The guilt she had carried finally burst out, raw and uncontrollable. Kangdu stood frozen, his back turned, then quietly walked away without a word. Wangxiu collapsed in tears, unaware that his pain was even heavier than hers. The place where they once laughed together had now become the ground where they broke apart. To understand how it reached this point, we must go back to the day before. Wangxiu and Kangdu had been inspecting the construction site together, chatting casually and sharing small smiles as they entered the office. Suddenly, an unexpected visitor barged in, a man who instantly recognized Kangdu and began shouting at him, cursing his father's name. He accused Kangdu's father of stealing steel bars from the original construction site years ago, claiming that theft had caused the building's collapse. Wangxiu froze, her face pale with shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Overwhelmed, she refused to listen to Kangdu's explanation and hurriedly left. Kangdu was devastated. Zhou Yuan tried to comfort him, insisting that no building could collapse just because a few steel bars went missing. But Kangdu's heart felt heavy and suffocating. That night, he walked alone through the quiet streets, the memory of Wangxiu's disappointed eyes haunting him with every step. Without realizing it, his feet led him to her father's small noodle shop. He stood outside, hoping just to catch a glimpse of her, some sign that everything would be okay. But instead, he saw Zhou Yuan standing with Wangxiu, confessing his feelings to her, watching the woman he loved and the only person who made him feel whole again listen silently to another man's words. Kangdu felt his chest tighten, as if a needle had pierced straight through his heart. Kangdu quietly stepped aside, hiding in the shadows. Sometimes when a person truly loves someone, that love brings not confidence but insecurity. Compared to Zhou Yuan, Kangdu felt small. Zhou had talent, education, and stability, while he himself had nothing but scars and a wounded past. Feeling unworthy, he turned and left silently. The next day, Kangdu went to find a Yang, the man he had fought with before, to apologize. He admitted that what his father did years ago was indeed wrong. A Yang also apologized, explaining that his own father had been one of the workers on that same site, which was why seeing Kangdu had triggered his anger. He also told Kangdu that Wangxiu had come to visit him, asking him to forgive Kangdu. She had defended Kangdu wholeheartedly, calling him an honest and good man. Hearing this, a Yang confessed that he shouldn't have passed his resentment toward Kangdu's father onto Kangdu himself. Kangdu was moved deeply and, without hesitation, ran off to find Wangxiu. But fate struck a cruel note. Just as he arrived, he overheard Wangxiu's mother talking about her ideal son-in-law candidate, and it was clear she already had someone in mind. At that moment, Wangxiu, as if sensing his presence, turned her head slightly. Hearing her mother's words, Kangdu's heart sank into quiet despair. He thought to himself, Zhou Yuan is perfect, capable, respected, and successful, while I can't even offer a stable life. What right do I have to dream of being by her side? Lost in thought, he didn't notice Wangxiu running up to him, out of breath, trying to apologize for leaving him so abruptly that day. But Kangdu's expression had changed. His warmth was gone, replaced by a distant coldness. He quietly pulled his hand away from hers and told her that Zhou Yuan was a better man, responsible, successful, and worthy of her. Wangxiu's face flushed with anger. She couldn't believe his words. She wanted him to fight for her, to stop her, to say something, but he didn't. Kangdu turned around and walked away without looking back, his heart breaking with every step. He wanted to protect her by pushing her away, because in his mind, love wasn't enough if he couldn't give her happiness. But Wangxiu didn't give up. Instead, his rejection only strengthened her resolve. In the days that followed, she finally learned the truth, that the boy who had been trapped with her in the ruins 10 years ago, the one who comforted her and sang to her when she was terrified, was Kangdu all along. He had suffered even more than she had, yet he was the one who had held her together through that endless night. The realization made Wangxiu burst into tears. When she found out that Kangdu was leaving for a long sea voyage, one that would last weeks, she ran ran desperately toward the harbor, her breath trembling with each step. Seeing her arrive, panting and teary-eyed, Kangdu's heart ached with conflicting emotions. He looked at her, the one person who made him feel both alive and afraid. Maybe, he thought, it's better if I face this cruel life alone. And with that, he turned away, boarding the ship without saying a word. Wangxiu watched his back fade into the distance, her tears falling freely. Just before the ship drifted too far, Kangdu turned slightly, as if to say a silent goodbye. Perhaps to her, perhaps to the love he couldn't keep. Days later, tragedy struck again. Kangdu's grandmother collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. When Kangdu got the call while at sea, he immediately returned home, only to be met with devastating news. His grandmother had been diagnosed with an aggressive, late-stage tumor. When he asked the doctor if there was any hope, the doctor's silence said it all. The reality hit him like thunder. Grief and helplessness washed over him completely. Leaving the hospital, he crossed paths with Wangxiu, but his heart was too heavy to speak. He brushed past her without a word, his face cold and distant. Still, Wangxiu quietly followed him home, her presence steady but unspoken. Kangdu ignored her completely, locking himself in his sadness. Yet when he stepped inside and turned around, he realized she hadn't followed him in, and for some reason, that emptiness made his chest ache. After showering, he walked out and found her sitting quietly on the rooftop, waiting. Under the dim evening light, Wangxiu looked at him and softly asked, "Was it really you, the one who was with me in that accident?" But Kangdu, his voice faint and calm, only replied with a cold, distant tone, as though afraid that confirming the truth would bring all the pain back again. Kangdu looked at Wangxiu and said softly that there was no meaning in trying to recover those painful memories from the past. He forced himself to hide his true feelings, deliberately saying words that would hurt her, because deep down, he believed this was the only way to make her leave him, a man who thought he had nothing to offer. Wangxiu, devastated by his coldness, ran out in tears, leaving Kangdu standing alone in silent heartbreak. Their sorrow felt like two heavy chains binding their souls, both in love, yet both suffering in silence. Wangxiu couldn't stop crying as she walked away, and though Kangdu watched from afar, the pain in his chest was unbearable. Standing on the rooftop, he looked at her fading silhouette under the dim light, his heart quietly breaking apart. As if sensing something, Wangxiu suddenly stopped and turned around. But the rooftop looked empty. What she didn't see was that Kangdu was still there, watching her from behind the wall, hiding his grief. That night, Wangxiu couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, recalling what Kangdu's grandmother had once told her, that Kangdu needed someone to listen, someone to help him open up his heart. Gathering her courage, she decided to comfort him. When she approached him, Kangdu suddenly grabbed her hand and, with a trembling voice, told her to leave immediately. Otherwise, if he held her hand again, he would never let her go. Wangxiu froze for a moment, then slowly pulled her hand away. Kangdu thought she was giving up and felt his heart sink. But before he could turn, Wangxiu stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him tightly. In that moment, all the walls he had built crumbled. Kangdu broke down completely, holding her in his arms and crying for the first time in years, letting out every bit of pain and grief he had buried inside. That night, for the first time in a long while, Kangdu fell into a peaceful sleep. When he woke up, he saw Wangxiu sitting quietly beside him, watching over him with gentle eyes. Her calm voice and soft words filled his heart with warmth and peace. From that day on, Kangdu stopped letting insecurity come between them. He realized happiness didn't need wealth or perfection. It could be as simple as holding her small hand in his large one. Their relationship grew sweeter each day. They started a simple, tender romance filled with small gestures and quiet affection. One afternoon, Wangxiu caught a cold and stayed home to rest. While chatting with Kangdu on the phone, she casually mentioned craving ice cream. Kangdu, ever thoughtful, immediately bought some and went to her house. But when he arrived, no one answered the door. He tried calling, but there was no response. Wangxiu had gone out to dinner with her mother, leaving her phone at home. Kangdu hesitated at the doorway, debating whether to knock. He thought about the last time he met her mother, the way she looked at him, clearly disapproving, and his confidence faltered. Finally, he decided not to knock. Then he noticed the electric meter on the wall. On a sudden impulse, he climbed up to leave the ice cream by her window. Meanwhile, Wangxiu returned home and saw several missed calls from him. She quickly called back, only to hear her phone ringing faintly outside the window. Opening it, she was startled to see Kangdu standing there, holding a small box of ice cream. Smiling warmly, she reached out and pulled him inside, then quickly locked the door. Blushing, Kangdu handed her the ice cream, and Wangxiu's face lit up with happiness. But suddenly, they heard the sound of the door handle turning. Her mother was coming in. In a panic, Wangxiu pushed Kangdu toward the bed and hid him under the blanket. Her mother entered the room carrying medicine. Nervous and flustered, Wangxiu took the medicine and nearly choked on it, her face turning red. Concerned, her mother patted her back and gently told her to lie down and rest, promising to turn off the light before leaving. Wangxiu obeyed, trying her best to stay calm, but her heart raced in fear that Kangdu might move or make a sound. Finally, her mother turned off the lights and walked out. The room went quiet and dark, and in that silence, Wangxiu could hear Kangdu's soft breathing beside her under the blanket. After Wangxiu's mother finally left the room, Kangdu let out a long sigh of relief from under the blanket. Wangxiu quickly told him to come out, but when he didn't respond, she panicked, thinking he might have suffocated. She hurriedly lifted the blanket, only to see Kangdu staring at her with dazed affection. Before she could react, he leaned in and kissed her, sudden and fierce like a storm. Then as Kangdu climbed out the window to leave, Wangxiu suddenly heard a noise and rushed to the window in fear, thinking he had fallen. But just as she reached out, Kangdu pulled himself back up, stealing one last kiss before disappearing into the night. Wangxiu stood there, blushing and smiling shyly, her heart fluttering like a trapped butterfly. She picked up the ice cream Kangdu had brought and took a bite, but as she did, she found herself thinking of the warmth of his lips instead. She hid her face in her hands, overwhelmed with embarrassment and happiness. The next morning, Wangxiu woke up full of energy, her cold miraculously gone. But poor Kang-do wasn't as lucky. After spending the night hidden under a blanket, he couldn't stop coughing. That evening, Wang-Xiu returned home to find her mother missing. When she called her aunt, she learned her mother had gone out again. In truth, her mother was at the cemetery, sitting before the grave of Wang-Xiu's younger sister, whispering her regrets and longing. When Wang-Xiu saw her mother come home later, pale and lost, she quietly waited at the door, but her mother walked past her without a word. Upon learning that Wang-Xiu was working at the construction site where the old mall was being rebuilt, her mother's anger exploded. She blamed Wang-Xiu, accusing her once again of not being with her sister the day of the accident. For the first time, Wang-Xiu couldn't hold back her feelings. She raised her voice and talked back, saying she was tired of living under that guilt. Her mother, overwhelmed with pain, slapped her across the face. Tears filled both their eyes. No mother ever wants her child to die, but Wang-Xiu's mother had been trapped for years in the grief of losing her younger daughter, unable to heal, unable to forgive herself. In her emotional breakdown, she told Wang-Xiu to leave the house. Crying bitterly, Wang-Xiu ran out and found her father, begging him to go home and take care of her mother. When Kang-do received a call from Wang-Xiu's father, he rushed to the noodle shop where the father was waiting anxiously for his daughter to return. Wang-Xiu arrived soon after, sitting quietly by the shop's entrance, her thin clothes no match for the freezing winter air. Without hesitation, he took off his own coat and draped it over her shoulders, gently taking her hand to lead her away from the cold. As they walked through the icy streets, Kang-do noticed her feet. She was wearing nothing but a pair of worn-out slippers. His heart clenched. Without a second thought, he bent down and carried her on his back. Wang-Xiu softly said she didn't want to go home tonight. Kang-do's voice, calm and warm, reassured her that she wasn't alone. Every word he spoke felt like sunlight melting the frost around her heart. For a while, it seemed that the two of them had finally found peace, a fragile but beautiful happiness after so many storms. But fate, as always, tests those who have suffered enough. One morning, while washing his face, Kang-do suddenly noticed blood trickling from his nose. He grew dizzy and collapsed, the bleeding worsening. Wang-Xiu panicked and urged him to go to the hospital, but stubborn as ever, he refused. Left with no choice, she brought him home to rest, her heart heavy with worry as she watched his weakened body tremble with exhaustion. While Kang-do was showering, Wang-Xiu began tidying up his room, and that's when she found an old phone tucked deep in his wardrobe. The sight made her freeze. It was her ex-boyfriend's phone. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, her mind spinning. Tears welled in her eyes as painful memories resurfaced. Just then, Kang-do came out of the bathroom and saw her crying. Concerned, he asked what was wrong, but Wang-Xiu, flustered, brushed it off and said she had to go. Watching her leave, Kang-do seemed to understand everything. He quickly grabbed her hand and pulled her into his arms, whispering his love for her over and over, trying to tell her how much she meant to him. Wang-Xiu looked at him through her tears, realizing how fragile, lost, and deeply human he truly was. A man who carried both love and sorrow in silence. Kang-do suddenly remembered everything from that tragic day in the ruins. How he had shielded Wang-Xiu with his body, holding up the falling debris so she could escape first. The moment she was pulled out to safety, a massive section of the rubble came crashing down, trapping Kang-do beneath it once again. Wang-Xiu was rescued, but due to temporary amnesia, she forgot everything, including Kang-do, who was still buried alive under the wreckage. Because of that, Kang-do remained trapped for several days. His wounds went untreated, his body broken and bruised. In the suffocating darkness, he was forced to survive beside lifeless bodies, surrounded by death and silence, clinging to life with sheer willpower. Meanwhile, Wang-Xiu lived peacefully for the next 10 years, unaware that her own memory loss had caused the man she now loved to suffer unimaginable torment. The realization shattered her. When Wang-Xiu remembered it all, she broke down completely. She cried until her voice was gone, consumed by guilt and despair. The truth was unbearable. Yes, she had been the cause of his suffering, yet it was Kang-do who had comforted her all this time. He never blamed her, never spoke a single word of resentment, even though she was the reason he had nearly died. Trembling, Wang-Xiu let go of his hand. She told herself that everything, all the pain, all the loss, had started because of her. If she hadn't gone to the mall that day, if she had let Kang-do escape first, maybe none of this would have happened. She began to believe she was cursed, a bringer of bad luck who would only hurt him more if she stayed. With that thought, she turned away without looking back, leaving Kang-do behind in tears, his cries echoing into the cold air. Soon after, Kang-do fainted again. Nimai, who had been worried about him, rushed him to the hospital for a full checkup. The results were devastating. Years of heavy painkillers had severely damaged his liver. The doctor said he needed an urgent liver transplant. Without it, his life was in danger. Kang-do sat there in disbelief, numb and trembling. When he stepped outside, the weight of it all hit him. He stumbled into the middle of the street, shouting at the sky, asking why fate had been so cruel to him. He screamed until his voice broke, collapsing into tears. But even then, he didn't tell Wang-Xiu about his illness. That night, his younger sister called, begging him to be admitted to the hospital immediately and urging him to tell Wang-Xiu the truth. Kang-do refused. He didn't want to burden her with his pain or make her worry. He thought, if I'm dying, why should I make her suffer too? Besides, they had quarreled earlier that day, another small misunderstanding that made it even harder for him to face her. Later that night, his friend Xiaopang noticed how pale and weak he looked. His words hit Kang-do suddenly, like a wake-up call. Realizing he might not have much time left, Kang-do ran through the quiet streets to Wang-Xiu's apartment building. Standing below her window, he begged her to let him see her one last time. Wang-Xiu stood by the window, torn between hurt and hesitation. Kang-do, his voice trembling, called out softly that he was sick, that he just wanted her to listen because he was afraid he might never get the chance again. But Wang-Xiu couldn't bring herself to open the window. Her silence stabbed deeper than any words. Overwhelmed by heartbreak and exhaustion, Kang-do's legs gave out and he collapsed right there under her window. When he opened his eyes again, he was in a hospital bed. Xiaopang was beside him, telling him that Wang Xiu had been the one who found him and brought him to the hospital. She hadn't left his side all night. No food, no rest, just sitting there, holding his hand, watching him breathe. Hearing that, Kangdu ran out of the ward, desperate to find her. When he saw her, Wang Xiu rushed toward him, pounding her fists weakly against his chest, tears streaming down her face. She cried out for him not to die, begging him to stay with her, promising that she would never leave again. Kangdu pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as his emotions overflowed. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine happiness again, even if it was fleeting. He decided that however much time he had left, he wanted to spend it with her. Looking into her tear-filled eyes, he asked gently, "Where do you want to go?" Wang Xiu, still trembling, lifted her gaze and pointed softly toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise, her silent answer full of hope and longing. Facing the soft morning light outside the hotel, Wang Xiu didn't know what would happen next. All she wanted was to show Kangdu the best version of herself, her truest, most beautiful side. But deep down, Kangdu was scared. He was afraid that with his failing health and uncertain future, he wouldn't be able to take responsibility for her happiness. He tried to resist, tried to pull away, yet in the end, emotion spoke louder than reason. Love isn't always about logic. Sometimes it's about living in the moment, and that's what they did. Kangdu finally held Wang Xiu's hand and walked with her into the hotel. What happened next was something words could hardly describe. A moment of passion, of love, of shared vulnerability. When it was all over and the room fell silent, Kangdu woke up first. He turned and looked at Wang Xiu, sleeping peacefully beside him, her face calm and gentle. Quietly, he pulled the blanket over her shoulders so she wouldn't get cold, his hand trembling as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. Then, without a sound, he left the room. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains as Wang Xiu stirred awake. When she reached out, the space beside her was empty. Panic set in. She hurriedly dressed and searched the entire room, her heart pounding. But Kangdu was gone. Finally, she found him standing alone on the rooftop of his house, looking out at the pale sky. There, under the soft glow of dawn, they sat together, quietly remembering everything they had shared. Their first meeting on the staircase, the day Wang Xiu saved Kangdu, the moments they spent on the swings watching the stars, the nights they walked side by side on the streets, laughing, eating ice cream, teasing each other. They remembered how Kangdu used to remind her to eat properly, how Wang Xiu would sneak out to visit him when he was sick, climbing through windows just to make sure he was okay. Their laughter turned into silence. Kangdu looked at Wang Xiu with eyes full of love and said he wanted to tell her everything that was still in his heart. But time never seemed enough. Every word felt like a goodbye wrapped in warmth. Slowly, he rested his head on her shoulder. His voice grew weaker, his breathing slower. Wang Xiu smiled softly, unaware that he was slipping away. Then his head grew heavier, his body leaned forward, and he went still. Wang Xiu froze. "Kangdu?" she whispered, shaking him gently, but there was no response. Her hands trembled as she held him tighter. Just when all hope seemed lost, a miracle happened. The hospital called. A matching liver had been found. Kangdu's life was saved at the last moment. After surviving 2 brushes with death, Kangdu and Wang Xiu stood hand in hand once again, their hearts stronger than ever before. Through pain, loss, and fate's countless tests, their love had become something pure, or a bond that went beyond fear and regret. As the old saying from the Book of Jacob goes, true love endures all trials. They didn't just fall in love, they healed each other, saved each other, and learned to cherish life because of one another. And maybe that's what love really means. With that, the story of Just Between Lovers came to its heartfelt end. A tale of pain, healing, and the quiet power of love. Thank you for watching till the end. I'll see you again in the next story.